It's year 3 of the Matt Eberflus regime, and we're still seeing important coaching mistakes hold this Chicago Bears team back. So it makes you ask and wonder, at what point is there coaching accountability, and what does that even look like?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we look at where coaching issues are holding the Chicago Bears team back, with Matt Eberflus' clock management timeout situations that are not being well operated in his third season, Shane Waldren, matchups and play calling errors that in his first season in Chicago, but far from his first year calling an NFL offense, and even offensive line coach Chris Morgan continuing to not put these players in great positions to succeed, and not seeing players get better. So we'll kind of hear about how the Bears are trying to take some blame for this stuff, but also like where can we see improvement, or how can we hold them accountable to this sort of thing? We may have to talk big picture about like job security and what the future might hold if things don't turn around drastically here in a hurry. But I think the most frustrating part to me is the stuff with Matt Eberflus, where it's his third year as the Chicago Bears head coach. And you're still seeing situations like in the game against the Indianapolis Colts, where Caleb Williams scores the touchdown and they send the field goal unit on, then call timeout, then send the 2-point conversion play in, get the offense back on the field. It doesn't work, but that was the right idea, to need to go for 2, because if you get the 2-point conversion, it would have been only a field goal. If you had kicked the extra point, you would have been down 4 and needed to score a touchdown anyway. And so there was no risk to going for 2. And you would expect an NFL head coach, certainly one who's been doing this for 3 seasons, to be prepared well enough ahead of time to say, hey, at the start of this drive, knowing that you're down the 11 points that the Bears were, you should know in the back of your mind that, hey, if we score a touchdown here, we need to go for 2. Like, it's not like you have to decide that math at the end when you do get in the end zone. You should just know, okay, we're down 11. The next time we score, no matter how we score, but especially once your offense has the ball, you got to know, hey, everyone, we got to go for 2 here to get us, within, to make it 8 points, to get us within the 3 points, as opposed to keeping you at 4 or 5. So why then do they have the miscommunication and the errors here of kicking team comes out there? Why was that not clearly understood and operated and implemented from the sideline that you would expect a third-year head coach to be able to handle? And Matt Eberflus took blame for it, but I don't feel like that's enough. Here's how he addressed it at his press conference on Tuesday.
Yeah, Coach, when it comes to going for 2, was that communicated to your guys before the drive that you were in a go for 2 situation, and that those guys need to be ready for that if you did score? And if not, when did you guys make that decision that you needed to go for 2, and when exactly was that communicated to the players?
Yeah, so that was just not good. Like I said, we need to be better there as coaches, communicating across the board to go for it, that we are go for 2, because we were down by 5. Obviously, that's the number one thing you do. And when I saw that it wasn't, then I called timeout to make sure that we got the guys ready and got them alerted, and then we got the best play that we had for that particular situation. So again, that's got to be better. We have been great at that, and we just got to be better in that moment.
And a quick correction, I think that was from Monday, not Tuesday on the date there. But still, nonetheless, Matt Eberflus says, yeah, we got to be better as coaches. Yeah, that's on us. We have to be better there. And my question then is when? Like, when are you going to be better? If you're not better by now, year 3 as the head coach of this team, when is that going to be better? Like you can say the excuse of like, well, okay, it's a new offensive coordinator and a new offensive staff, and so still trying to work out the communication there between head coach and offensive staff. But it is the same special team staff and largely the same defense, other than defensive coordinator. It's not like it's a brand new coaching staff. Like I just don't quite buy that. We're still trying to work out communication stuff. Like you're the head coach. This is your job. This is like your most important job. Like this is the thing that's solely on your shoulders. Like the whole point of having Matt Eberflus as the Chicago Bears head coach is for him to be kind of that CEO, culture, locker room leadership overseer of all things football operations, on the field type of guy. Matt Eberflus is not here because his defensive scheme is so genius. Like the defense plays well and he's a defensive head coach, yes, but like that's not his primary value to the Bears, right? His primary value to the Bears is, the hits principle and the culture and the building of the team and like having everybody on the same page, on the same side. Like it's supposed to be communication. It's supposed to be accountability. It's supposed to be all these things that like make for a good organization from the head coach position. And clearly stuff like this is not good communication, not good organization from the head coaching spot. Same thing with, I think it was the Texans game when Matt Eberflus throws the challenge flag for a catch that was made right in front of him on the sideline. That, yeah, it's a quick play, but not a play that you absolutely had to throw the challenge flag in like a critical game situation. Like I don't expect that Matt Eberflus necessarily needed to see that play absolutely perfectly, but I do expect that a head coach in year 3 of an organization has a good enough challenge operation together between him, the things he can see with his eyes, the players, the coaches, and then especially the coaches and staff up in the booth that have replay monitors and can call down and say, hey, throw the challenge flag, or hey, don't throw the challenge flag there. Like we have seen as recently as 2 weeks ago and throughout Matt Eberflus's tenure, bad uses of challenge flags to go with bad uses of timeouts, mismanagement of the clock in some key situations. And you can kind of excuse it or at least explain it, in a head coach's first season. They've never been in that role. They're still trying to work out the kinks of how communication happens top down in an organization. Like you can kind of be patient with it in a coach's first season. But now in year 3, where's the accountability there? Like how can you assure us that that's not going to happen again? How can we trust that you are growing and developing as a head coach in the ways that you need to in order to put this team in the best position to win, instead of getting the 2-minute warning with one timeout at the end of this game against the Colts and not having an opportunity to stop the clock and come back in the ways that you needed to? Like it's those kind of things that can be the difference in wins and losses in one-score games. Like when the difference between having those timeouts or having that challenge flag or being able to get a 2-point conversion play in the first time and then, see the defense and not have to waste a timeout in that situation. Like to be able to just operate like the little things smoothly. Because that's the other thing. This is not hard. Like this is not the hard part of being a head coach. Knowing when to call 2-point conversions versus the PAT, like is stuff you and I can do from our couch, right? Maybe the challenge flag thing is a little bit different, but like he's supposed to have a whole team that's supposed to be there to tell him when to throw the flag and when not to throw the flag. And it seems like a failure of him and the people he's hired for that exact job to not be able to execute that. And it makes it that much harder to truly trust the way Matt Eberflus runs this organization. But when he's the head coach, like, you're not going to fire him over that specifically. And he's not going to fire himself, and you can't really demote yourself. You're the one who's in charge of timeouts. Like, you have to be better. But if you haven't been able to be better in now your 3rd season, can we ever expect you to be better? Or is that always just going to be one of these flaws in the Bears head coach and coaching staff that continue to be an issue? I feel a lot of that same frustration with offensive coordinator Shane Waldren and offensive line coach Chris Morgan for that regard. Like guys who have been doing this for a long time, but we're seeing mistakes that feel pretty directly attributable to them. And so we'll kind of look at where the concerns are with Shane Waldron, how they're different, and whether or not there should be some accountability there at some point and what that might look like next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel because they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That $5 bet can be on anything. It doesn't just have to be your Chicago Bears. They've got college football and the WNBA and the baseball playoffs coming up right around the corner here. But of course, if you're feeling confident about this Bears-Rams matchup, the Bears are 2.5-point favorites at home on the spread there at FanDuel Sportsbook. The money line is Bears -156, and the over-under is set at 40.5. All you do is place a $5 bet on any of those, any bet of your choice, and they're going to throw in a $5 bet on any of those, and they're going to throw in a free $200 in bonus bets. So to claim those $200 in guaranteed bonus bets, visit FanDuel.com. There needs to be accountability for how Matt Eberflus and the coaching staff can just say, oh, that was our bad. Whoopsies. We'll do better next time. Shucks. The three years into this regime. But there also needs to be accountability for offensive coordinator Shane Waldren, because we knew coming in he was no perfect offensive coordinator from the Seattle Seahawks. I think we thought he would be a bigger upgrade over Luke Getsy. I think there's still time for him to improve, and I think there's more room to be patient with Waldren having a rookie quarterback, having a new offense, trying to get to know these pieces. Like, they should have started faster, and you can't say, oh, he's doing a great job. No, but I think compared to Matt Eberflus, who's making these mistakes in year 3, versus Shane Waldren, who's making these mistakes in game 3, you can kind of have maybe a little bit more patience for Waldren, but it's concerning that he has been an offensive coordinator and a play caller now for going in his, 4th or 5th season overall in the NFL, and you're still seeing issues like the speed option play on 4th and 1, where they just an absolute disaster call at the goal line. Or right before that at the goal line, they have wide receiver DeAndre Carter trying to block a defensive end on a running play. And Matt Eberflus said at his press conference on Monday, yeah, me and Coach Waldren watched the tape early in the morning, and we talked about how we can't have that and how we can't be putting guys in that position. It's great, I'm glad that you're recognizing there's a problem, but what are you going to do about it? And when are we going to see some real progress in that? Because we know that with Waldren coming over from Seattle, Seahawks fans had some frustrations with him too, and I don't want to play revisionist history here and use 2020 hindsight to say all along we always knew that Shane Waldren was going to be a questionable choice for the Bears offense. I think we were all excited about Shane Waldren. I think the jury is not 100% out just yet. It's been a very, very bad start, but we can still give him time to adapt and change, and more than just 3 games to be the verdict on what he's going to be as an offensive coordinator. But it's been a very, very bad start. And I wanted to go back and look and say, okay, is this the same kind of stuff Waldren was doing wrong in Seattle? Or, is this different? Is this just a continuation of what we've seen from him before? And I think there's a couple things that have carried over, and then there's some stuff that's very different. And depending on your level of optimism or pessimism, you can look at that as either maybe a good thing or maybe a bad thing. So I think first we'll say that in Seattle, one of the things we heard a lot from Seattle Seahawks fans when Waldren left was they struggled in the red zone. Shane Waldren's offense could not finish drives with touchdowns. When they'd get down there, they'd get 4th and 1 at the goal and run speed option. I mean, not literally, but that stuff, that exact situation where the Bears had 1st and goal and couldn't get in, is the exact kind of stuff that there was frustration with in Seattle. There was frustration in Seattle with the running game there and getting too pass happy and maybe abandoning the run. And I think we've seen some of that with the Bears and having some run game issues. But I think there's some other aspects here that you might find interesting that were different in Seattle, the things he wasn't great at in Seattle, and then compare that to what we're seeing in Chicago right now, where there might be some real significant differences here. So what I want to do is go back to earlier this year in January, when the Bears hired Shane Waldren. We talked to the host of Locked On Seahawks, Corbin Smith, and he was somebody who right away was not a huge Shane Waldren guy, and that was kind of counter to a lot of the narrative at the time was great hire by the Bears. And so we had Corbin Smith on this podcast to talk about maybe some of the concerns, the good and the bad, about Shane Waldren. And so I just want to play you a clip. I don't recycle a lot of old clips from the podcast, but this one's 8 months ago. So it If you did hear it, you certainly forgot it. And I'm sure plenty of you weren't here listening to that back in January at the time. So I just want to play you a couple minutes of Corbin Smith breaking down what he saw, what he liked and didn't like from Shane Waldren in Seattle, and then use that to compare to what we've seen from Shane Waldren this year so far for the Bears. Where do you sort of see like the bigger picture evaluation of Waldren? How do you look at him as an offensive coordinator?
So I'll start with the positives. I felt like when he took over for Brian Schottenheimer, the one thing that he did do for this offense that really helped Geno Smith when he became the starting quarterback.
Where do you sort of see like the bigger picture evaluation?
Taking more options to
tight ends. As an offensive
and this
coordinator.
was 2 years ago. They were getting their tight ends heavily involved. That was one of the big reasons Geno Smith completed almost 70% of his passes. They were attacking parts of the field that they didn't, whether it was because Russell Wilson couldn't do it or they just preferred not to attack the middle of the field with him at quarterback. They were playing their scheme differently, and it was more like the Sean McVay system that you see the Rams run, and that's understandable. Waldron was with McVay on his staff for several years. Where things really started to go downhill this season, though, and I noticed this the season before as well, it wasn't as drastic when you looked at the splits, but it just seemed like in the second half of games, Geno Smith was able to will the team back to 5 comeback victories. But you look at the adjustment standpoint, it seemed like the Seahawks would consistently get off to fast starts on offense, and then the defense would make adjustments, and then Shane Waldron just didn't know what to do at that point. After halftime, this offense was brutal for most of the season, despite having all the receiving talent they have, having a quarterback that I still think when he's playing at his best, I truly believe Geno Smith is a top 10 caliber QB. He played like it the last 4 games of the year too, and there just hasn't been consistency in the approach. The tight ends were not near as involved, and maybe the thing that was most frustrating, and I know for some fans this isn't going to be viewed as too much of a negative because today the NFL is a passing league, but I can't tell you how many games this past season and even the year before at times where it seemed like if the run game wasn't working early, rather than keep going back to it, Shane Waldron would just go and do drop back mode. And they didn't have the offensive line to do that. It put Geno Smith in some really tough spots, even with the talent he had around him, under pressure constantly. It just wasn't playing to the offensive line that they had. And they were not going to be a running juggernaut, but they really made themselves one-dimensional. And that was part of the reason that the time of possession differential was so bad for the Seahawks this year. The third down conversion rate on offense was part of it, but the biggest issue was that they just didn't have a run game most of the time. It was non-existent. They were near the bottom of the league in that category, despite having 2 really talented running backs that did the most they could with what they had. So those are some of my frustrations that I had watching this offense. There are some things in the passing game that I think will be really good for whoever's the quarterback for the Bears next season. I'm not going to sit here and say that there aren't positives to Shane Waldron, but 3 years in, this offense got stale. It became really predictable in the second half of games. He was one of those coordinators who was excellent with his designed plays at the beginning of the games that he had on his sheet. And once he got past that point, you could just see things unravel a lot of the time. And luckily they had quarterbacks, and I'm saying that because Drew Lock did it too, that could make comeback victories late. But a lot of those games, the offense had multiple drives in the second half where they just completely stalled out. So that's the downside with Shane Waldron.
Again, that was Locked On Seahawks host Corbin Smith talking to us here on the Locked On Bears podcast back in January after the Bears hired Shane Waldron. And I think from Corbin's analysis there, a couple things stand out comparing them to what we've seen from Waldron's offense so far this season. A couple of things that are the same this year as they were for Waldron in the past, a couple of things that seem different. So on one end, the things that look like have translated over from Seattle is attacking the middle of the field well. I mean, we've seen Caleb Williams have a lot of success hitting that area and opening things up for the offense, especially this past game against the Colts. They've been able to hit the middle of the field, and that's a good thing that Waldron's been able to get going for this offense. That was a struggle sometimes under Luke Getsy before. Another one of the things that has translated is that, like, the Seahawks offensive line was bad, and Waldron struggled to call plays that would work for a bad offensive line. And I think we've seen that in Chicago as well, like a propensity to not be able to properly adjust to when the offensive line is struggling. Now, the interesting thing that felt different to me was he talked about how great the Seahawks were on scripted plays. In the opening couple of drives of the game, the Seahawks would come out great and then struggle to adjust. And it feels like with the Bears so far this year, it's been a little bit the opposite. they've been really slow out of the gate, and it hasn't been until the third and fourth quarter that this offense has finally found some rhythm. It happened in the Texans game and in the Titans game a little bit in the third quarters, and then last week against the Colts in the fourth quarter, they finally get some things going. They found some ways to adjust later on. So is that a sign of progress from Shane Waldren that, hey, he's finding ways to adjust? Like, is that a sign that he's improving as an offensive coordinator and then can keep getting better in some of these ways? Or is it a sign that maybe he's not as good on those scripted plays and hasn't been able to dial things up for this offense and still isn't adjusting for the offensive line well enough, and maybe that some of these concerns are going to continue to linger? Like, I think it kind of depends on your perspective so far, but I do think it is still a little bit early for him when it comes to, fully evaluating his hiring as Chicago Bears offensive coordinator. We'll see how things go over the course of the season, but what's clear is that adjustments need to be made, or else significant accountability will be needed on offense. Maybe that could start with, your offensive line coach, where that's been the Achilles heel of this Bears team this season. He's been here for 3 seasons, and we're not seeing this offensive line get better. Could they make a change at that spot? They've got a replacement for him on the roster. And then I also want to look bigger picture, like, okay, by the end of the season, if things don't get better, then what? What kind of changes would be properly holding this Bears coaching staff accountable? We'll take a look at some of the different options in front of Ryan Poles and this Bears regime next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy. It's here to help you be the best version of yourself. It can help you respark some of that curiosity you had as a child and reconnect with that sense of wonder to really help you live life more fully and holistically and not just get too caught up in the day-to-day of life. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try, because I do therapy online every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and that's why I recommend it for you as well. BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a really brief questionnaire, and then they'll match you with a licensed therapist. And if that first therapist just isn't the right choice for you, that's okay. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. If things don't turn around in a major way for this Bears team, if things just keep spiraling, something is going to have to change on this coaching staff in particular, because it feels to me like this is much more a coaching issue than a personnel issue. We can criticize Ryan Poles for not investing enough in this Bears offensive line. I think that's valid. But given the talent they have at wide receiver, at the skill positions on offense, and pretty well across the defense, like, the reason the Bears are 1-2 and struggling on offense is not completely or very much a Ryan Poles issue. Again, offensive line, yes, but there's a lot more to the football team that he's done very well, even though there are areas he hasn't done well. But it feels to me like the offensive line isn't well coached. The offensive game plan and play calling isn't well designed and executed from a coaching standpoint. And then the head coach is still having issues with timeouts and game management and challenge flags and the stuff that should be easy and is the primary duties of a head coach. And so you kind of have to start asking yourself, how long do you have? How long is the leash here for Eberflus, for Waldren, for Eric Washington? Defensive coordinator is probably pretty safe given how well the defense is playing. But for offensive line coach Chris Morgan as well, at some point, if the offense is still struggling after 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, do you have to make some kind of change? Maybe not fire offensive coordinator midseason. Maybe that's not where the Bears would be just yet. Although you could be sitting there feeling like, okay, you've got Thomas Brown on your coaching staff as an offensive passing game coordinator, who was the Panthers offensive coordinator last season and was with the Rams for a number of years before that. I don't think Brown was a great coordinator for the Panthers, but if you just wanted to make a change and get somebody with some kind of experience in there, you do have one of those on the roster. I don't think that necessarily totally solves the problem, though, for the Bears. But I also look at this offensive line and say, would a different voice in that room be a difference maker? Because, Chris Morgan, the offensive line coach, has been here since Eberflus got here in 2022. He was promoted to offensive line coach and run game coordinator for this 2024 season. And the running game has been the worst part of the offense and the worst part of the offensive line. So at some point, if we're 4, 5, 6 weeks in the season and the running game still isn't going, you look at that and say, okay, we're not going to change the whole offensive coordinator out, but maybe you move on from your offensive line coach and say, sorry, not doing a good enough job. Especially when you do have an assistant offensive line coach on the staff, Jason Hoftaling, I don't know how to say his last name, who you could then promote to the offensive line coach spot and be a natural replacement for him. Now, again, I don't know that he's going to come in and just in 1 week wave a magic wand and fix this Bears offensive line, but he was added as assistant offensive line coach just this offseason. So it's not as though he's just a disciple of Chris Morgan who's going to step in and say all the same things that Morgan was saying. He might be able to provide a little bit different of a voice and maybe some different ideas or approaches to coaching the O-line. Again, I don't think it necessarily solves the problem, but it feels more like closer to something like accountability, right? Like it's kind of like when you talk about firing a head coach mid-season. Like you don't fire a head coach mid-season because you think it's going to instantly make the team better, but you fire a head coach mid-season to say, hey, what you're getting on the field is not acceptable. And maybe it's not going to get better with his replacement, but you're at least sending a message to the team, to the organization, to the league that we don't accept low quality on our coaching staff or on our football team. And that's where maybe just an offensive line coaching change could be, just a dabble of accountability, just a dabble of maybe call it scapegoating for Shane Waldren and Matt Eberflus, but like something that feels like accountability on this roster. Because if they don't make that kind of a step early here and show some real improvement, if we get to the end of this 2024 season and this team is, 6-11 or 7-10, you start to have the Matt Eberflus conversation again and the Shane Waldren conversation again. And I do think the Eberflus conversation is interesting because, okay, if you fire Shane Waldren at the end of the season, let's say if we look ahead and things don't get better, which, I don't mean to, I'm not assuming that's going to be the case, but let's just think big picture here for a moment. Should Matt Eberflus be allowed to pick a third offensive coordinator? I mean, Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren were involved in this offensive coordinator search a little bit more, so they probably share some of the blame here for Waldren not working out. But should Eberflus be allowed to pick a third offensive coordinator? Because the other side of this coin is okay, say you fire Matt Eberflus, you fire the whole coaching staff. Well, then you risk losing a really great defense. You're changing out your defensive coaching staff entirely. Is the next coaching staff going to be able to coach this defense up to the level that the Bears defense is currently playing at? I mean, it's a lot to expect them to come in and just pick that up and say, yep, same defense is going to be just as great. Especially if everyone wants to hire a new offensive head coach to replace Matt Eberflus if they fire him. Okay, well, then his defensive coordinator pick becomes a really big part of this conversation. I do think personally, if you were to get to the point where you fired your coach and we're going to fire the coaching staff, I do think it is worth risking losing a great defense in order to get a head coach to maximize your offense. It is more important that the future of the Chicago Bears coaches up Caleb Williams properly than it is to continue to have a great defense. You do need to have a good defense, but more important than a good defense is a great quarterback. Great quarterback number one, great defense is 1A or number 2. If you had to pick between a great quarterback and a great defense, you got to take the great quarterback because you've seen great quarterbacks overcome not having very good defenses, but rarely do you see a great defense overcome not having a great quarterback. And so whatever you can do for Caleb Williams is what's going to be the most important decision when it comes to whether you fire your offensive line coach midseason or not, whether you fire your offensive coordinator at some point, whether you fire your head coach at some point. I mean, any of those kind of decisions at any point along the line here should be 100% with the focus of what's best for Caleb Williams. It should have been that case when they made the decision at the end of last season to keep Matt Eberflus and fire Luke Getsy. That should have been about what's best for Caleb Williams. The decision to hire Shane Waldren instead of Clint Kubiak or Cliff Kingsbury or, pick your offensive coordinator should be about what was going to be best for Caleb Williams in that process. And so everything along the way should be what's best for Caleb Williams. And perhaps, and I think rightfully so right now, what's best for Caleb Williams is unfortunately patience. Patience for Caleb, patience for the running game, patience for the offensive line, patience for the offensive line coach, patience for the offense as a whole, patience for offensive coordinator Shane Waldren. And it sucks. And you don't want to sit here and have to be patient when you see Jaden Daniels go have the big game, although I think those comparisons are not fair either. And I think the Jaden Daniels' big game is probably a little bit overinflated by how bad of a defense he played against in different situations. I want to do a podcast about that, but not yet. We'll get to that conversation at some point. But the point being, we're frustrated by seeing how bad this Bears team is, and we want something to change, and we want something that feels like accountability. and I don't think we're going to get it. And I think our only choice is to be patient and say, okay, it is only game 3. It is a rookie quarterback. It's a new offense. It's a lot of new players around them on offense. They can still figure things out. They're not doomed for the rest of the season. It's not going to be this total and complete meltdown and spiral from here. They're going to win games. They're going to play better on offense at some point. Are they going to win 11 games? Probably not. Are they going to be a top 5 offense? Probably not. Like, we can adjust our expectations down, but we don't have to say, oh, season's over, fire everybody today. Like, no, this Bears team's not there yet either. They were within 1 touchdown of the Colts. They were within 1 touchdown of the Houston Texans. Like, as far away as they feel, they're also not completely that far away. This is not the Jacksonville Jaguars, where it's an absolute mess from top to bottom there. This is not the 0-3 Bengals panicking that they're totally wasting a big year of Joe Burrow's championship window. Like, this is a young Bears quarterback, a new Bears team that we knew was going to be messy. So let's try and have some patience with it and not fire anybody just yet. But hopefully some kind of accountability can lead to some kind of change for some kind of improvement for this Bears team. That doesn't feel like a lot to ask. And I hope it's not too much to ask. If and when the Bears make some changes here, even if it's just by, scheme, not firing anybody, but just try and do things differently, we'll break down all of the developments of this Bears offense and defense over the course of the season, what changes week in and week out, right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, don't forget to check out our new Locked On NFL show with 2 shows every day. It's the Madman Tyler Rowland in the morning, and then Tony Wiggins brings you into the barbershop for the second show of the day every single day on Locked On NFL, alongside our national Locked On hosts, bringing you some of the local expertise as well. Then come back to Locked On Bears tomorrow. We'll have Crossover Thursday with Travis Rogers or Doug McCain from Locked On Rams to get a sense of what the heck's going on with all the injuries in Los Angeles. And before you know it, it'll be game time, and we'll be breaking down the results of Bears-Rams next week as well. So keep tuning in, keep making Locked On Bears your first listen every day, and in exchange, I'll promise to always give you another opportunity to bear down.